told the full story about America's most famous monster.
One of the nation's worst mass murder cases ever.
Police found a grisly scene. A human head, plus several more skulls and parts of bodies.
But Jeffrey Dahmer's twisted tale doesn't end with his conviction. This is the story of the next horrific chapter in the Milwaukee cannibal's life. His brief time behind bars.
Convicted mass murderer Jeffrey Dahmer has been killed.
Told by those who knew him best.
Prison life was not going to be easy for Mr. Dahmer.
Okay, I baptize you in the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, for the forgiveness of your sins. He went from being a monster to becoming a real person.
I've interviewed a lot of criminals, and Jeffrey Dahmer's demeanor was sad.
Did you kill Dahmer?
No exception to the rule.
He said, I killed him because I did not feel that he had the right to be called a murderer.
I thought right away that it was a setup.
Somebody finally did something. He's finally facing some sort of justice.
It's an ordinary Monday at the Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin. The maximum security prison, housing one of the country's most terrifying boogeymen, serial killer and cannibal, Jeffrey Dahmer.
On the morning of November 28th, 1994, Jeffrey Dahmer finds himself on a work detail with two other inmates, Jesse Anderson and Christopher Scarver.
They had been assigned to clean the gym and the locker rooms and then go back to their cells.
Dahmer, he's still supposed to kind of have a guard there watching him. And for whatever reason, the guards, they left all three of these men alone, just stepped away.
Jeffrey's just minding his business, cleaning, when he hears someone creeping up behind him.
It's Christopher Scarver.
When Dahmer turns around, he's met with a weighted metal bar to the face and is brutally beaten until he is near death and bleeding out on the floor.
And Scarver's not done yet. He then attacks Jesse Anderson.
He lays Jesse Anderson out. He just starts beating him in the head. And the inmate just calmly walks back to his cell.
Back in the gym, all hell breaks loose.
The guards immediately rush in and they find Dahmer in a bloody heap just on the floor. And Jesse Anderson with his head bludgeoned in.
When the guards realize Scarver's missing from the work detail, they go to his cell to question him.
He responds, "God made me do it. You'll see it on the 6 o'clock news."
News of the attack on Dahmer spreads like wildfire among the inmates.
The prison goes into a frenzy. Ambulances have to be called. The whole prison goes on a lockdown. Guards are trying to get control of the situation, but really everyone's freaking out and place is full of chaos.
Medics rush the badly bludgeoned serial killer and Anderson to a local hospital, but neither make it.
Convicted mass murderer Jeffrey Dahmer has been killed. Fatal injury suffered this morning at Columbia Correctional Institute.
For some, news of Dahmer's murder is a shock.
I got in the car, turned the radio on, and they announced that Jeffrey Dahmer had been killed. I couldn't hardly believe it.
oh my God, is Jeffrey Dahmer.
Murder is murder. It wasn't Mr. Scarver's responsibility to end his life. The murderer is now a celebrity.
But for others, it's no surprise.
There was like a sense of relief, like, okay, it's finally done. Somebody finally got it taken care of. To me, Christopher Scarver was kind of like a hero. For Jeffrey Dahmer to suffer until he passed, I think he deserved every bit of agony he went through.
Some people just feel that vengeance is justice. Well, it's not hard to understand that at a human level.
Scarver thought Dahmer was a rat because he was a bad human being and did not deserve to live and did not deserve to have the title murderer. Scarver, he said, I'm a murderer. Dahmer was not.
Knowing Jeffrey Dahmer the way that I did as my neighbor, and then having been incarcerated myself, I kind of thought that he would have a difficult time while incarcerated, because in prison, the majority of the population is black, and the majority of his victims were black.
17 victims in total. Most of whose remains are uncovered 3 years earlier inside Dahmer's innocuous Milwaukee apartment.
One of the nation's worst mass murder cases ever.
Police found a grisly scene. A human head, plus several more skulls and parts of bodies.
To kill multiple men, human beings, and retain their body parts in your refrigerator, where your butter is, your juice, your jelly? Who does that? Not a normal person.
He wasn't the first serial slayer that I'd prosecuted, but he was probably the worst human being in terms of what he did to those bodies.
When arrested, Dahmer simply admits to all his unspeakable deeds.
He was cooperative. The police officers told me they thought he was to a very good extent truthful.
Dahmer confessed to crimes the police didn't even know existed. A whole bunch of homicides that Dahmer testified to, there was no report of any missing person. Dahmer didn't put up any defense to anything. He just said, I did this, and this is how I did it.
He was never about getting away with it in the first place. Dahmer is all about looking for a sense of structure and normalcy and attention seeking. He wants to feel love and connection, which is somewhat different from other serial killers. So when he was finally caught, he had nothing to gain by keeping it to himself. In fact, he had an opportunity to get more attention than he's ever had, to tell his story.
Although police discover various parts of 11 different victims inside Dahmer's apartment, he confesses to murdering 17 men and boys, including his youngest victim, 14-year-old Jamie Doxtator.
I had made lasagna that night. He asked me to save him an extra piece. He said him and his friend Tony were going to go next door and they were going to play video games. But he didn't show up. I couldn't find Jamie after that. I seen an interview with Dahmer, and they specifically asked him why he chose the Native American boy. He said he had been watching him. He said he was always so clean, good looking, always well dressed, always took care of himself. And he said that's what attracted him, my son. Jamie was always adventurous. He had no fear. He wasn't scared of getting hurt.
People didn't see him as a threat or a dangerous person. Nobody was afraid of him. He was always able to be polite and well-spoken.
Here's this mild-mannered guy who worked in a chocolate factory, and it turned out he was killing people, and he was a cannibal. What was terrifying about Jeffrey Dahmer was how normal he appeared. It's how he got away with it for so long. It was how he was able to escalate and become this horrible serial killer.
You would think a mouse is going to be unattractive. Well, he was exactly the opposite. He was very attractive. Blonde hair, blue eyes, I remember those. People say, wonder how he killed 19 people. That's how.
Frankly, I don't think there's been a serial killer as fierce as Jeffrey Dahmer since Jeffrey Dahmer.
That January, the country watches with bated breath as Dahmer heads to trial.
Jeffrey Dahmer never wanted to be put on trial. He just wanted to be put to death. He knew he was guilty, and he told me that he didn't wear his glasses during much of the trial because he didn't want to be in the courtroom. He didn't want to see what was going on.
But Dahmer's attorney, Gerald Boyle, believes there is one plea that may spare his client's life.
My first order of business was to see if there was an insanity defense. Because if you read his confession, you would see no questions asked that there was something wrong with him.
I mean, here's a man who was killing folks. He was having sex with their dead bodies. At one point, he was drilling holes in the heads of individuals, thinking that he could create zombies who would continue to live with him. I certainly didn't think that he was a man of sound mind who was just misbehaving.
Dahmer could fully explain what he did, and he can fully explain that his actions were wrong.
What he did was horrible. It was unimaginable. It was the worst kind of crime that could ever happen. Was it insane? To you and me, yes. To the law, maybe not. It was a hard trial to sit through. Hearing from people who had been victimized by Jeffrey Dahmer was horrible. The details were unbearable. And the sorrow and anger of the victims' families was heartbreaking. How could you blame them for being angry and for being devastated by what this monster did?
But a jury finds Dahmer sane. And after a grueling 2-week trial, convicts him on 15 counts of first-degree murder. Dahmer barely flinches.
He was completely calm, quiet, collected, no evidence of stress.
Dahmer was the easiest client I ever represented. He never asked for anything. He never demanded anything. He never suggested that we could do a better job. Never one time did he complain.
While Dahmer's trial is emotionally exhausting, it's nothing compared to the final impact statement a victim's relative gives before his sentencing.
Jeffrey, I hate you, mother! I hate you! This is out of control!
He didn't react at all. I'll never forget that. The bailiffs jumped in and stopped the lady before she got to him, but you can understand she was overwhelmed.
Then it's Dahmer's turn to deliver a statement to the victims' families.
I know my time in prison will be terrible, but I deserve whatever I get because of what I have done. I ask for no consideration.
He receives the maximum sentence.
The 15 consecutive terms of life imprisonment, which would be basically about 950 years.
While Dahmer awaits transfer to the prison where he'll spend the rest of his life, across town, another accused killer bides his time behind bars as well. His name is Christopher Scarver, and he has no idea that one day fate will put him directly in the path of the monster on his screen. In the winter of 1992, Dahmer settles into the Columbia Correctional Institution, a maximum security prison in Portage, Wisconsin, to live out the remainder of his life.
The kinds of people that are kept in CCI are severe cases. It's a maximum security prison for a reason.
The local townsfolk aren't thrilled with their new resident.
It did kind of ruffle some feathers. The people in Portage didn't want their town to be known for the place that housed this horrific serial killer. They would rather it be known for other things that go on there, and like all the festivals and their historic downtown.
Prison officials are aware of the dangers Dahmer faces and place him in solitary confinement.
Columbia Correctional Institution houses a few hundred people there, probably overcrowded. So even though the vast majority of inmates probably weren't looking to have anything to do with Jeffrey Dahmer, there's a few crazy ones out there who feel like they need to carry out vengeance.
When somebody like Jeffrey Dahmer goes to prison, they often have a target on their back because of their celebrity, but also because their crimes are usually more heinous than your average prisoner in jail. So the prisoner population now has somebody to vilify. Now they're not the villains, they got a new villain.
They knew that somebody was gonna kill him, so it was really to protect him, because it was like if they would have put him in general population, as soon as he would have stepped on the floor, it just would have been over.
Dahmer's isolation is a difficult trade-off.
You don't see other people, you don't get to talk to other people. It's boring and gets very lonely. We think we don't need people, but stay in there a while.
Humans are social creatures. The human brain relies pinging off of other people in order to understand who we are. And when we lose everybody around us, we have nothing in the external world to stimulate us, so we go internal. To take us away from other people is to slowly drive us insane.
Dahmer endures his time in isolation, but after a long, lonely year, reaches his limit being alone.
I think that started to eat at him, because one thing about Jeffrey Dahmer is he needs attention, and I think that started to make him a little stir crazy when he got there, for sure.
Jeffrey petitioned to actually be released to general population.
Dahmer figures he's going to take his chances with the population rather than continue to be in solitary confinement.
Just put me in gen pop and whatever happens, happens, you know, because you're technically dead right now. You're in solitary, yeah, you're breathing and stuff, but I mean, it's over.
In the summer of 1992, prison officials grant Jeffrey Dahmer's request to live among his fellow inmates.
Where Jeffrey Dahmer ends up was a specific ward for the mentally unstable, almost a prison within a prison. And when he's not in his cell, he's being taken from place to place in shackles with guards. He is not left alone.
Many wonder if Dahmer will face prison justice from his fellow inmates.
We like to think we're in control, but the reality is there's always more inmates than staff. Always.
The last thing you want to be is a person with a target on their back in a prison. To be a person who the prisoners universally want to harm is not a good place to be. He was in real shark-infested waters.
It's in Gen Pop that convicted murderer Christopher Scarver sees the infamous serial killer in person for the first time.
I think Christopher Scarver was, like everyone else in the prison, angry and disgusted at the actions of Jeffrey Dahmer, but also just kind of wanted to avoid him because he's a weird guy.
Neither man knows it yet, but they're on a collision course for destiny. fellow inmates Jeffrey Dahmer and Christopher Scarver have more in common than they realize.
Christopher Scarver, much like Jeffrey Dahmer, grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. At a young age, he started to do bad in school because of his alcohol use, and that caused him to fail out.
So he drops out of school, and his mom kicks him out of the house because of all the alcohol and drug use that he was doing. And his mom had 5 kids, single mother. She was like, well, I can't have that around my other 4 kids.
A couple years later, Scarver manages to get his life back on track, enrolling in the Wisconsin Conservation Corps job program.
The Job Corps is basically like a place where you rebuild your life, you learn skills, and if you do a really good job, then they'll give you a job at the end of it. He was taking the carpentry program.
Edward Patz, one of the instructors at the Corps, takes Scarver under his wing.
Edward Patz really took a liking to him, and he promised him, he said, when you get out of here, I'm definitely going to have a job for you. I'm going to make sure I take care of you.
Scarver moved in with his girlfriend. He finds out that she's pregnant. Life seems to be going the way that it should be going for Christopher Scarver. You know, he has a lot of things to look forward to.
Then, without warning, Scarver has the rug pulled out from under him. Edward Patz is fired, and the site manager, John Fayen, gives the promised job to someone else.
When that happened, that really threw Christopher off on a deep end. You know, he got more in the marijuana, drugs, alcohol. And then around this time as well is when he was, you know, having voices in his head. He was saying the voices was telling him he's the chosen one. Now, all this is happening, and at the same time, his girlfriend was pregnant as well.
To do all the right things and get affirmation for them, and then have that affirmation taken away, is really devastating. It's a terrible feeling and terrifying as well, you know, to be 19, having a family to support.
And just, it seems like he just didn't care anymore at all. He went into this like little black hole of depression.
With his life spiraling out of control, Scarver thirsts for revenge. On June 1st, 1990, he goes to the Conservation Corps training site and confronts John Fayen and another employee, Steve Lohman.
Christopher comes in with a gun and he demands money. So John pulls $15 out of his wallet and he says, you know, this is all I have. And Christopher turns around and shoots Steven. After he shoots him, he says, okay, now you know that I'm not playing. John says, I really don't have any money, so he writes him a check for $3,000.
But Scarver still isn't satisfied.
He shoots Steve like about 3 more times. He starts shooting into his dead body.
John, who is terrified, runs away as fast as he can. While he's running away, though, Chris is still shooting at John, but fortunately misses. And after that, Chris flees the scene.
Police immediately put out an APB for Scarver. He's surprisingly easy to locate.
Within a matter of hours, Chris was arrested at his girlfriend's house with both the gun and the $3,000 check still in his possession.
They charged Scarver with the murder of Steve Lohman and attempted murder of John Fayen. He pleads not guilty by reason of mental disease.
Eventually, it was found out that he had schizophrenia. You would hear voices that would say he's the chosen one.
Psychiatrists at his trial testified that although there are many people that have schizophrenia and they're not violent, she felt that if Chris went untreated, he would definitely become extremely dangerous to himself and others.
He had what's called Masonic delusions, delusions of grandeur, religious type delusions, thinking that he was some embodiment of God, some higher power. In that psychotic state where you're responding to voices and things telling you what to do, it becomes very easy to justify any actions that you take.
Like Jeffrey Dahmer, a jury also finds Scarver sane and therefore guilty of murder. They sentence him to life without parole and eventually send him to the Columbia Correctional Institution, where he comes face to face with Jeffrey Dahmer.
He studies him, but he keeps his distance. He wants nothing to do at all with Dahmer.
But that will change. Jeffrey Dahmer isn't making many friends inside prison, but he does develop a devoted cadre of pen pals.
Jeffrey Dahmer's crimes had put him into the ranks with Jack the Ripper and Ted Bundy, to where it was so shocking that people gravitated towards it instead of running away from it. So he's now in prison receiving fan mail with money inside of it for commissary, love letters, devotees singing his praises.
He was getting mail from not only men, but women as well, that wanted to pursue a relationship with him, even though they knew that he was a homosexual.
Hybristophilia, sometimes called Bonnie and Clyde syndrome, is the attraction to criminal behavior. It gives the person who usually has a more beta personality, somebody who is not secure in themselves, winds up being attracted to that sense of danger, that sense of take charge that serial killers often provide. And that's why Dahmer winds up getting all these letters in prison. People who are so fascinated with him, they just can't leave him alone. They start to empathize with Jeffrey Dahmer, to correspond with him from prison. That gives you enough room, enough space to fill in your own fantasies, your own desires, and what you want the relationship to be.
But Dahmer has other, more celestial interests.
Jeffrey gets out of solitary confinement, and he seemed like a new man because he's found religion.
As Dahmer promised in his courtroom statement,
I promise I will pray each day to ask for their forgiveness when the hurt goes away, if ever.
He turns toward his faith behind bars.
Religion became a big part of his day-to-day life. He would go to the chapel and pray, starts to read the Bible.
The part of Jeffrey Dahmer that turns to religion is the same part of him that feels remorse for what he's done. The part of him that is human and has a sense of morality. And so religion offers an escape from that. It offers him a second chance, a way to be forgiven and wipe the slate clean.
It's not the first time Dahmer's turned to Christianity. In 1981, a few years after committing his first murder, Dahmer moves in with his grandmother in Milwaukee and tries to reform his evil ways.
His grandmother was a spiritual person, and she seemed to have a beneficent influence on Dahmer. Dahmer started reading the Bible, started thinking about these things, and assessing what he had done.
When Jeffrey was 13 years old, he had engaged in a romantic physical relationship with a boy in his neighborhood. And this was the first inclination to Jeffrey that he was in fact gay. But it was something that Jeffrey felt like he had to hide. Religion was like his last effort on trying to fix what he thought was broken, which was being gay. And he really dove into that and spent a lot of time studying religion, going to church, and everyone around Jeffrey thought that this was going to be a really good thing for him.
It appears to work until Dahmer has an encounter at the local library.
The young man dropped a note in his lap saying, "Let's meet in the bathroom and have a sexual encounter." Dahmer didn't do that, but he started rethinking the spiritual aspects of his life and then made a conscious decision to step away from what had been the good influence of his grandmother.
Desperate to act out on his dark desires, Dahmer finds a new romantic partner, a mannequin he steals from a local department store.
Dahmer has this mannequin as a kind of stopgap measure, somebody he can impose his will on that won't fight back.
Dahmer keeps his new love a secret, storing the mannequin in his closet whenever he's away. But it's only a matter of time before his forbidden partner's exposed.
One day, his grandmother went into his room, opened his closet, and was shocked and disturbed at seeing this mannequin. So she completely freaked out and forced him to get rid of it.
Now, Dahmer must turn to other ways to get his kicks. Outside the home.
Bathhouses were a place that you could go and anticipate you would meet a sexual partner. But the men there found Jeffrey Dahmer to be incredibly creepy.
He would drug them. He'd say, here, have a drink of my, coffee, whatever you'd be using. The guy would take the drink and pass out, and then Dahmer would sexually exploit him according to his desires. The underlying driving force with Dahmer was the fantasy of sex with an unconscious person.
There becomes a point of no return. He's like a shark that's had a taste of blood. There really is no going back for Dahmer.
The rest is history.
Police found a grisly scene. A human head, plus several more skulls and parts of bodies.
Now in prison, Dahmer appears to fully embrace his newfound faith. He even requests to be baptized.
I got a phone call in 1994 saying an inmate wanted to be baptized. Would I please baptize him? I said, okay, I've never done a prison baptism, but tell me what his name is, and we'll do that. He said, well, you might want to sit down for this. Well, why is that? Because his name is Jeffrey Dahmer.
Pastor Ratcliffe heads behind the razor wire to meet with the man he only knows as legend.
I first heard about Jeff on the television, of course. I remember thinking, why would a person do that? And I didn't quite know what to expect because I'd never been to a prison before. And I anticipated, well, I'll probably be in a room with a glass wall between us while I'm talking to him on a telephone. So I was quite surprised when I was escorted to a simple room, 10 by 12 feet or so, with a table and chairs, and told, sit down. Finally, someone comes to the door. It's Jeffrey Dahmer. I recognize him because I've seen him on TV. So there I am in a room all by myself with nothing but a table between the two of us. And I'm thinking, wow, I'm in a room with a man who's killed a bunch of other people. You have a moment of panic there. But because I'm a preacher, why do you want to be baptized? And so he begins to quote scriptures from me, which is a surprise. He needs to have his sins washed away. It changed my view of him. He went from being a monster to becoming a real person.
Prison officials approved Dahmer's baptism for May 10th, 1994.
On the day that Jeff was baptized, there was a total solar eclipse, so it got dark on that day. It was also the day that John Wayne Gacy was put to death, which is, I think, ironic. Jeffrey Dahmer died to his sins, and John Wayne Gacy died for his crimes. The chaplain and two guards escort Jeff and myself from the chaplain's office through various halls. And then we passed other inmates, and they said, hey, JD, how's it going? And he said, hey, I'm going to be baptized today. And they thought, well, that's great.
The guards lead the pastor and serial killer to the medical area, which has numerous tubs.
And Jeff takes off his clothes and puts on this white little outfit that the chaplain had made for him, and then climbs into the tub. So then I simply put my hand on his head and say, okay, I baptize you in the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, for the forgiveness of your sins. Just push his head under the water. And then he comes back up and I said, welcome to the family of God.
But not everyone's pleased with Dahmer's embrace of Christianity.
On the day that Jeff was baptized, some anonymous person called on my phone and described me as a piece of human anatomy. Well, he used a more crude word to describe it. Well, he didn't understand why I did what I did.
When I heard that Dahmer had apparently found religion, I thought it wasn't real with him. He didn't take it to his heart, and I didn't feel that he ever would. I don't feel that he should have been baptized because he didn't believe.
I think it infuriated a lot of people, but also left a lot of people conflicted because If you are a devout religious person and this person is now saying, I've accepted this religion and I've repented for my sins, then you got to forgive Jeffrey Dahmer. And it's hard to forgive a guy when you've seen bags of hearts and arms and shoulders and heads come out of their apartment. So I think it really made people question their religion in a way.
It's easy to think of him as all evil or all good. He was a complicated person, and so he did awful things, but I think it's also conceivable that he could have been genuinely remorseful and struggling and conflicted, and that we shouldn't just dismiss the complexity of that as though he's just pretending to look good. I think it's much more complicated than that.
I never got the sense that he was being anything other than genuine with me. No, this is very serious stuff as far as I could tell with him.
Following the baptism, Dahmer continues on his new spiritual path, reading the Bible and meeting once a week with Pastor Ratcliffe.
So the chaplain arranges for what's called a permanent pastoral pass. Every Wednesday from that point on, I could come to Jeff and meet with him for an hour and talk about anything that we want to talk about. But my encouragement to him was, don't put yourself off into your cell by yourself alone. Try to be around other Christians as much as you possibly can.
The Milwaukee cannibal takes the advice to heart and begins attending Sunday services in the prison chapel. It's there he'll come face to face with a new threat. A reborn Jeffrey Dahmer is living his new life behind bars, holding weekly Bible study with his pastor. But some of his fellow inmates, like Christopher Scarver, believe it's all an act.
Christopher Scarver mentioned that Jeffrey Dahmer had these unremorseful eyes. He didn't buy the religious act that Jeffrey Dahmer was putting on, and it made him want to commit violence against him. Dahmer was very mischievous, for lack of a better term. I've heard stories of him taking his lunches and whittling them into body parts and then pouring ketchup on them and kind of leaving them there on the table for people to see.
He will walk up to guards and say, I do bite.
A lot of people say, oh, that's disgusting. And I said, no, that's Jeff Dahmer. That's his sense of humor. And I saw that in junior high and high school, and that was still his sense of humor in prison too.
The word cannibal, it's a persona that he adopted, that he pursued and tried to get people to think in that way of him.
I think in general, Jeffrey Dahmer was very much a bear off a leash to a lot of people. Unassuming guy, scrawny, gigantic glasses. But once you know what he's done, you are, apprehensive. And now you have a person who is playing the role of Hannibal Lecter and making jokes and smiling at you and, being cheeky.
He even went as far as to put up a sign in his cell that said Cannibals Anonymous Meetings. So he was definitely leaning into the ideals that everyone already had of him, which is this man is playing the game, and he probably still has these same sick feelings that he had when he was out doing these killings.
It's with his 8th victim, Ernest Miller, in September 1990, that Dahmer crossed the Rubicon from serial killer to cannibal.
After he killed Miller and dismembered him, he cooked him and he ate him.
Like, what does that even taste like?
Dahmer realizes if you eat them, they'll always be with you. And that provides a satisfaction and even sometimes a sexual component to the psychopath that'll never leave me.
He is keeping their bodies in his apartment. He is preserving them and they're stacking up. You can only imagine the smell that was coming from Jeffrey's apartment.
The level of depravity was way beyond.
Some believe Dahmer's actions in prison aren't an attempt to make light of his crimes, but to get the attention that he craves.
When you look at Jeffrey Dahmer when he was young, when he was in high school, this profoundly socially awkward person that only knew how to get attention by making weird faces and jumping around and acting in this bizarre way. Any attention for a guy like Dahmer, any attention is good attention. And so Dahmer's gonna do whatever it takes to get any kind of attention, even if it's ridicule, even if he's being laughed at, as long as he's not ignored.
One of the things I clearly remember about Jeff Dahmer is that, you know, he would be walking down the hall and you'd be standing there talking to somebody by your locker, just doing nothing. And he'd just stoop over and put his head on your chest and say, I want to listen to your heart.
I think he used the cannibal persona as a defense mechanism because it accomplished two things. One thing, it attracted attention. Come look at me, look, I'm doing something weird. And at the same time, it also was a way of saying to people, don't get too close to me because I don't trust you, because he didn't really have friends.
And while he doesn't know it, Dahmer is making enemies. One inmate in particular is beginning to harbor deep animosity toward him. 37-year-old Osvaldo Durruti.
Osvaldo Durruti was a Cuban native. He was serving 30 years in prison for drugs and weapons possession. And he heard about the Jeffrey Dahmer case, and he had this self-righteous feeling that this is an opportunity for me to wipe the slate clean.
Durruti comes to America in 1980 as part of the Mariel Boat Lift, a mass immigration of Cubans to the United States.
I wanted to come to the United States because, you know, this is delaying an opportunity, man. You know, everybody wants to come to the United States.
But Durruti, who had been serving a 10-year sentence for robbery in a Cuban prison, has no skills.
I was young, man. I was 21. I had nobody in the United States. To make my way up, you know, I had to keep doing what I was doing in Cuba, you know, stealing, selling drugs, and hustling my way around, you know, to survive.
In 1991, Durruti gets in over his head.
I was selling drugs to undercover, and I didn't know it was an undercover. I got caught with 2 kilos cocaine, you know. I was big time, you know, seller, and I had a gun also. I went to prison for a long time. I thought I would never get out. They gave me 31 years.
Durruti is sent to Waupun Correctional Institution in Waupun, Wisconsin. That's where he first learns of Jeffrey Dahmer, watching his trial unfold on TV.
I feel offended for what he did to humankind, you know, to humanity. You know, that's crazy, man. That pissed me off, you know.
The more he hears about Dahmer, the more Durruti's anger builds. When Dahmer is sent to prison, Durruti decides he wants vengeance.
I said, well, you know, he might kill again. He might do it again inside the joint also. I had 31 years, I had no more freedom, you know. So I say, why not? We're trying to stop this man.
But when Dahmer's sent to the Columbia Correctional Institution, one of Wisconsin's few prisons with a mental health unit, Durruti knows their paths will never cross. That's when he devises a plan. Durruti decides to fake mental illness so he can be transferred to Dahmer's prison.
I was always talking crazy, talking loud, and cussing people up. When I go to the doctor, I tried to pretend like I was paranoid, pretending to have demons, you know, all over me, you know. It takes dedication to do that, man, you know. I was serious about what I wanted to do.
In late June 1994, after nearly 2 years of acting crazy, prison officials finally send Durruti to the state's mental health institution. It's in the mess hall where Durruti gets his first look at his prey in person. But Dahmer isn't the boogeyman he had envisioned.
This is a handsome man, you know, why he gotta kill, why he gotta eat it, why he gotta do that?
He knows getting close enough to attack Dahmer isn't going to be easy.
The only way inmates can get together is a chapel on Sundays. So I decided, you know, to go to church on Sundays and see what I can do out there.
But Durruti's not bringing his Bible. Instead, he creates a makeshift knife, a shiv, by attaching a razor blade to his toothbrush. On Sunday, July 3rd, 1994, just 1 week after Durruti arrives at the prison, he prepares to strike.
When I got to the chapel, I noticed there was a lot of inmates, and I sat about 3 rows from him, behind him. I took my shank out of my socks, and I keep it in my hand, carry it in my hand, you know. That was when I grabbed him. I grabbed it with my left hand and put it in a headlock. I started, you know, slashing.
But in a flood of adrenaline, Durruti presses too hard on his shib, and the razor blade snaps off.
He broke, leaving only the mark on his neck. And when it happened, I got so fucking mad. I started hitting in the face. Pa, pa, pa. Before the guy came, you know, and pulled him away.
Much to Durruti's disappointment, the wound to Dahmer's neck is superficial.
Osvaldo took premeditated to a whole new level. I mean, think about having to fake an illness, not just an illness, a mental illness, for over 2 years just to get to this one person. I mean, there was a lot of hard work that went into that. So I can imagine the amount of disappointment that he felt to know that he failed.
I was pissed, man. I was pissed because I wasn't expecting that to happen. How did that happen? He's supposed to be dead.
For his attempted murder of Dahmer, authorities tack on an additional 5 years to Durruti's existing 31-year sentence and send him back to Waupun Correctional Institution to serve his time. While Durruti's assassination attempt fails, it does inspire other inmates who share his hatred for Jeffrey Dahmer.
In prison, news travels fast. So the fact that there was a murder attempt on Jeffrey, it got around.
I had heard that someone had tried to get at him, but that they weren't successful. And I said, give it time. Sooner or later, someone is going to put an end to this monstrous deviant. It's just inevitable.
She has no idea how right she is.
In the shadows and in the background is Christopher Scarver observing every move and fuming at the evil acts that Dahmer did, and it made him truly infuriated. And he started to brew and fantasize about what he would do if he ever was faced with the ability to get revenge for the people who Jeffrey Dahmer killed. Once Osvaldo acted first, he got permission to do what he wanted to do.
But Dahmer won't be Scarver's only intended victim. At the time of Jeffrey Dahmer's arrest in 1992, the nation's attention is focused on the grisly details of his murders. But across town in northwest Milwaukee, there's another drama unfolding. One that will soon introduce another new character into Dahmer's orbit. On April 21st, 1992, Jesse Anderson and his wife Barbara are enjoying a pleasant evening out on the town with a movie and dinner.
Jesse Anderson, he was a salesperson for like an oil company. It paid really good money because he was a good salesman. And Barbara ended up, just being a stay-at-home mom because they had 3 kids. They had 2 girls and a boy.
People that knew him said that he was a model guy, really. He worked hard. Not only did he go to church, but he would volunteer. He was active at his children's school. He just seemed like the perfect family guy. A couple months before, Jesse and Barbara actually went on a second honeymoon together to Jamaica. So the couple seemed like they were connecting, enjoying each other's company, and things were going really well.
But shortly after 10 p.m. that night, the Andersons' date devolves into chaos.
According to Jesse, once they were leaving the restaurant, 2 black teenagers approached them trying to rob them. They then attacked Barbara and started stabbing her multiple times. And Jesse said he tried to save her and got stabbed as well. There was a struggle, and he said one of the teenagers left an LA Clippers hat behind and fled the scene.
The manager of the restaurant ran outside along with another man who happened to be an EMT. Jesse actually had the knife in his chest.
The police arrive on the scene, and Jesse gives them the Los Angeles Clippers basketball hat.
Paramedics rush Barbara to the hospital and directly into surgery for her more than 20 stab wounds. But her injuries prove too great. She dies 2 days later. The brutal murder shocks the local community and sends the media into a frenzy.
This perfect family was just the victim of random violence committed by young, violent black teens.
The police appealed to the public to see if anybody was familiar with the LA Clippers hat, or maybe had an idea of who may have committed these crimes.
But investigators have questions about the attack, particularly the disparity between the couple's wounds.
Barbara had been stabbed 21 times in her head and in her face. And one of the knife wounds actually went through to her brain. All his injuries are superficial.
For Barbara Anderson's wounds to be so vicious and gruesome, and for Jesse Anderson's wounds to be so superficial, as the man that you would assume would be the defender and the one who would put up more of a fight, raised alarms very quickly.
Then, several days after the attack, a young man comes forward with a story that blows the case wide open.
Tommy Miles, who he had saw the hat on the news, said that he was at the mall and a man came up to him. It was a white man, bald and glasses, and he was like, "Can I buy that Clippers hat from you?" He offered $20. And at the time, Tommy Miles, he was happy because he said he originally bought the hat for $14. And then he saw it on the news. He feels like basically he's implicated in that murder.
Tommy's description of the man who bought the hat from him fits Jesse Anderson to a T.
Things after that start to really unravel. Police started to investigate further and talk to people close to the couple. They learned that there was abuse involved.
Detectives found notes from Barbara that really painted the real picture of family life with Jesse, where she details the abuse that she suffered and the constant threats of him leaving her and the family.
I think the nail in the coffin for Jesse was when police were able to track the murder weapon back to a military surplus store that Jesse had actually bought it from a few weeks prior. They were even able to find the receipt. So there's no way that Jesse can deny that that knife was attached to him and not some random killers.
Police charged 34-year-old Jesse Anderson with first-degree murder.
The public was furious, and understandably so. He's trying to frame two innocent people for something that he did.
I think what Jesse Anderson did is one of the more evil things that you could do. Things like that is what got Emmett Till killed. It's an easy lie with very severe consequences.
In August 1992, Anderson is convicted and sentenced to life without parole for 60 years.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Jesse Anderson, guilty of first degree.
Anderson is sent to the Columbia Correctional Institution.
He finds himself at the same prison where Christopher Scarver is and Jeffrey Dahmer is as well.
And Jesse didn't know it at the time, but eventually he will be linked to one of the most notorious serial killers of all time.
For the past 2 years, convicted murderer Christopher Scarver has been quietly watching his fellow inmate Jeffrey Dahmer from across the prison.
Scarver becomes so obsessed with Jeffrey Dahmer because it gives him that sense of direction, something to focus on in prison, which to the idle mind of your average prisoner is more important than oxygen. It keeps the social mind engaged. It keeps them feeling like there's a meaning to their life, rather than them just being this husk rotting away in prison. Now I have a sense of direction.
Many believe Scarver's untreated mental health issues are putting him in a precarious position.
Grandiose delusions are relatively common within psychotic disorders. If you believe that you are special, it gives your sense of self a higher purpose. This made Dahmer a prime target to Scarver.
On November 28, 1994, Christopher Scarver decides it's time to act.
Christopher Scarver was serving a life sentence for murdering a boss. There was a job promised to him that he didn't get. While Jeffrey Dahmer couldn't have cared less about anybody, Christopher Scarver had already created this, holy Cold War in his mind of good versus evil, and I'm going to smite this evil person, Jeffrey Dahmer.
That morning, prison officials pair Scarver up on a work detail with Jeffrey Dahmer and convicted wife killer Jesse Anderson.
They are tasked with cleaning up the gym's locker room, and as fate would have it on this day, somehow Jesse, Jeffrey, and Christopher are left alone.
According to Chris, after the guard steps away, he's filling up the mop bucket with water. And while his back is turned to the two men, he feels a poke in his back. When he turns around, he sees Jeffrey and Jesse, and he said that they had a little bit of a smirk. They were kind of giggling under their breaths. So he didn't really know which one of them actually poked him.
It infuriated Scarver, and he made a decision right then and there that this was the moment that he was going to take his vengeance upon Jeffrey Dahmer for the actions that he had caused in Wisconsin.
The men split up for their cleaning duties. That's when Scarver makes his move. He picks up a 20-inch metal exercise bar and closes in.
Scarver decides to follow Jeffrey to the staff locker room, and when he gets in there, he said he asked Jeffrey if he really did the things that the media said that he did.
Dahmer started to realize that he was in some sort of imminent danger, and he tried to evade Christopher Scarver.
Christopher locked him, and that's when he started to hit him in the head several times. After viciously attacking Jeffrey, Christopher's not done and decides to walk over to the inmate locker room and attack Jesse. And Christopher does exactly what he did to Jeffrey to Jesse.
Shortly after, the absent prison guard returns.
The guard finds both men suffering severely from their injuries.
He calls for help, and the gravely injured prisoners are rushed to the hospital.
I was in the office at the newspaper. I heard the scanner go off, calling for an ambulance out of the prison. I was just thinking, it's just probably a couple inmates got into a fight, but probably something I should check out. Just as I got there, I saw 2 ambulances pull out.
The reporter goes with his gut and decides to follow the ambulances to the hospital.
So I get to the hospital and I see Jim Smith, the sheriff. He was like, I don't think one of these guys is going to make it. And one of them is the most infamous inmate in the prison. That's when it really hit me. Oh my God, is Jeffrey Dahmer.
Dahmer has multiple skull fractures and brain trauma. He dies an hour later.
There were so many ironies in all of this. The way in which his first victim had died in Ohio.
The year is 1978. A then 18-year-old Dahmer picks up hitchhiker Stephen Hicks and invites him back to his house to drink beer and smoke some weed. But the evening takes a turn when Jeffrey begins making sexual advances.
When Stephen realized that Jeffrey was trying to make a move on him and feed him alcohol in order to, get into bed with him, that was not something that Stephen was willing to do. And that's when he tried to leave. And that in turn made Jeffrey angry and upset because he felt like he was being rejected.
Dahmer snaps and bashes Hicks in the head with a dumbbell. "16 years later, Dahmer is killed nearly the same way, as is Jesse Anderson. The news spreads like wildfire.
Possibly the most notorious serial killer in American history met his own brutal end today.
Everybody on the outside world was shocked. Needless to say, most people were happy.
I knew that it was just a matter of time that he would get his own death sentence. I know a lot of people rejoiced about it. I'm not going to say I was elated, but there was like a sense of relief, like, okay, it's finally done. I think Scarver did what needed to be done. Maybe Jeffrey Dahmer had a death wish of his own. I just don't think he thought it would be as agonizing as it was.
I don't know how you can hear the story of Christopher Scarver and not believe in karma. It was this serendipitous event that put two people on a collision course, and I'm not mad at the outcome. Sometimes, the universe is always talking.
This person who had caused so much chaos and confusion in our city for so long was now no longer alive. Was I glad that somebody had killed him? No. What would I get out of that? Did bring any of those 19 men back that he killed? Him being dead wasn't the answer to the problem.
I was at the grocery store with my wife, and I got in the car, turned the radio on, and they announced that Jeffrey Dahmer had been killed. I couldn't hardly believe it.
But Pastor Radcliffe isn't just surprised, he's angry. After the attempt on Dahmer's life by Osvaldo Durruti 4 months earlier, prison officials promised to increase security.
After the July attack, the chaplain took me aside and said, "We're very embarrassed about what happened, and we're going to go to great lengths to make sure Jeff is always protected. So when this murder occurs, I feel betrayed."
Many raise questions about the attack. How could something like this happen in a maximum security prison?
It's very Epsteinian in the way that it went down. It's very sketchy. Somebody that high profile dies in your jail, there needs to be an explanation as to how something like that can happen.
I thought right away that it was a setup, because there's no way that you can be in a maximum security prison and the guards aren't with you. Jeffrey Dahmer was the most hated man in Wisconsin. And you had correctional officers that were from Milwaukee. So for them to arrange for Christopher Scarver to be alone with Jeffrey Dahmer, knowing what the outcome would be, I think that they didn't have a problem putting 2 and 2 together and coming up what we know now as it happened.
And the investigation into Dahmer's murder will only raise more questions. Even after Jeffrey Dahmer is murdered in prison, he continues making headlines when his parents publicly fight over his cremated ashes.
At the time that I met Jeff, his mother and father were divorced, and Lionel was remarried to someone else. And there was a great bitterness between the two of them, which I didn't realize until after Jeff was murdered, that they would fight over how many ashes each one got.
Dahmer's parents even fight over their son's brain.
That was a big issue, because in Lionel's book, He implied that she was taking medication while she was pregnant with Jeff. He thought that affected Jeff's brain, that made him into the killer that he was. She was rejecting that. So much bitterness between the husband and wife.
But Dahmer's parents aren't the only ones stirring up controversy. Their son's murder while in maximum security raises myriad unanswered questions.
We're not just talking about any regular old inmate, right? We're talking about Jeffrey Dahmer. So the fact that he was murdered in prison when he was supposed to be under supervision, the conspiracy theories started popping up left and right.
There are some people who believe that the guards were sick of Jeffrey Dahmer themselves and walked away just to see what might happen. There are other theories that maybe there was money that was paid to make these guards happen to step away to the bathroom for an extended amount of time.
Leaving inmates unsupervised is a no-no. That's why they hire correction officers, so inmates are always supervised. Even if they're using a bathroom, even if they're in the shower, they're not supposed to be alone.
Authorities charge Christopher Scarver with 2 counts of first-degree murder for killing Dahmer and Jesse Anderson. But at his arraignment, Scarver provides few clues to his motives.
Did you do it? Everybody plays the fool this time.
Did you kill Dahmer?
No exception to the rule.
Sheriff's deputies had him out in the hallway, and I thought, this is just so bizarre. It was really strange, unexpected response.
Vernell Bass, who once lived next door to Jeffrey Dahmer, also served time with Christopher Scarver and remembers his unusual behavior.
I did meet him while I was in prison, and he was someone to be avoided. It was as if though the lights were on, but no one was home. He don't make his bed up, don't wash his face, don't brush his teeth, none of that. That's a sign of someone whose mind is not correct. Christopher Scarver, in my opinion, needed to be somewhere where he could get help for the criminally insane.
In an attempt to put the conspiracy rumors to rest, the Wisconsin Department of Corrections appoints a panel to investigate Dahmer's murder. One member of that panel is Dahmer's former attorney, Gerald Boyle.
I was obviously honored and delighted to get the call because I thought maybe I could be of some help.
Several members of the panel decide to personally interview Scarver, who is being housed in conditions straight out of a horror movie.
We go over to the prison, and we're in a room like in the movie Signs of the Lamb. He's in his cage. We're all around the cage. We're in a cage too. So it's like a cage within a cage. And we sit there, and suddenly the gate opens up, and Scarver comes in. I said, Mr. Scarver, there are many people who are saying and thinking that you're doing what you did to Jeffrey Dahmer was racially motivated. Scarver told me the following. I didn't kill him because he was white. I killed him because I did not feel that he had the right to be called a murderer. I mean, if that isn't crazy in and of itself.
The panel ultimately concludes there was no conspiracy to kill Jeffrey Dahmer. One guard had stepped away to make a personal phone call, while another had gone to the kitchen.
When the investigation was concluded, they decided that Christopher did indeed act alone, and that the guards, yes, they were negligent, but there was no premeditation behind what happened.
The guard that was on duty at the time was suspended for a few months. Everybody was like slapped on the wrist. And then the world went back to how it was because you can't fire somebody for Jeffrey Dahmer dying.
At his trial, Christopher Scarver once again pleads insanity, claiming he was told by God to kill Dahmer and Anderson. And once again, a jury deems him competent.
Eventually, he pled no contest, and he was found guilty of both charges and sentenced to life in prison without parole. He was sent to solitary confinement, and he spent over 10 years in solitary confinement. He was hopped around to different institutions for a while because basically no one wanted to deal with him. Their main excuse was, we don't have the resources to house someone like this, but in actuality, I really think they just didn't want the headache.
While authorities try hiding Scarver away, they can't stop him from talking. And decades after killing America's biggest boogeyman, he's now ready to confess why he did it and how he pulled it off. In 2015, more than 20 years after he murdered Dahmer, Christopher Scarver grants an interview to the New York Post and reignites the debate over the Milwaukee cannibal's death.
Christopher Scarver insinuated that the guards left him alone on purpose so that he would kill Jeffrey Dahmer.
The way he's saying it is, did the guards tell him to do it and kind of turn a blind eye?
But Scarver's admissions don't end there. In the interview, he also provides a new motive for why he killed Dahmer. He claims Dahmer taunted inmates in the mess hall by playing with his food.
He would shape his food into body parts and then use ketchup to act like they had been dismembered or to imitate a death.
Almost like thumbing his nose at people as like, yeah, I am the guy that eats people.
Is this what pushed Christopher Scarver over the edge? Some have doubts.
I just don't believe it, because that certainly wasn't the Dahmer I knew. Maybe he changed the way he was, but I just don't remember ever acting like that.
Yeah, I got the impression that he thought he got along well with everyone. When I'd ask him that, he said, oh, I get along fine. No, I don't have a problem with anybody.
Why then did Scarver kill Jeffrey Dahmer? Despite his claims that race was not a factor, some don't believe it.
I can't really think of another reason. Jeffrey targeted men of color that he killed, and Jesse Anderson tried to blame two men of color for something that he did that was awful. That was what connected the two of them.
Still, others posit a different motivation.
I think the main reason Scarver killed Jeffrey Dahmer was pretty much due to mental illness. It was a schizophrenic reaction to voices in your head that are telling you that you have a higher purpose, that you have a calling, that if you take this guy out, somehow you will be saved, somehow you will be better. Our concept of mental illness and its impact in 1994 was not what it is now. Scarver was likely very undertreated for his mental illness. Had he been properly medicated, getting the right kind of therapy and the right kind of support, this may never have even took place.
Whatever Scarver's motive, there's no denying some view him as a hero.
He did bring karma down on Dahmer, but how can we call him a hero if we got to look at his crime too?
There's like this corner of the internet now that is honestly creating some type of fan club for Chris. Like they're giving him this new level of fame that he never really had when the murders first happened almost 30 years ago.
The public perception of Scarver was that he was the good guy here, that he saved the taxpayers a lot of money.
But was justice served?
And I think because Jeffrey was a white man who killed men of color, and the fact that he was killed by another man of color, I think it's kind of like a sense of justice. It's not a good thing, but I feel like people are finding joy in that.
Some people just feel that vengeance is justice. Personally, I can't find a justification for that.
It made me sad because somewhere, someone loved that man. And that person right now, finding out that their loved one had been killed in prison, they are suffering the same as his victims' families suffered.
It wasn't Mr. Scarver's responsibility to end his life, nor was it Jeffrey's responsibility to end those 19 lives that he did. But as my grandmother used to say, 2 wrongs don't make a right.
Christopher Scarver kind of represents this taking care of the thing that nobody could do, stepping up and vanquishing evil.
Scarver said that he has no remorse for what he's done to Dahmer. He feels Dahmer deserved it, and I agree with him. I believe that the good Lord knows all his transgressions, and he's finally facing some sort of justice. That's how I feel.
God says, I want you to forgive as I forgive. But we don't want to do that. We want to do the justice part because that's more fun for us.
You look out throughout time and culture, we've always had some villain that shocks and captivates our attention, whether it's Jack the Ripper or Richard Ramirez or Jeffrey Dahmer. Society has always and will always have that boogeyman that they are attracted to and repulsed by simultaneously.
I think the next generation is more interested in what happened with Jeffrey because honestly, it's the shock value, right? A lot of people are interested in the worst parts of being a human being. And Jeffrey is one of the worst depictions that we've ever seen.
Jeffrey Dahmer thought, I'll kill someone and I'll feel better. I'll dismember them and I'll feel better. Then he thought that didn't work, so he would have sex with the corpse. It just kept getting worse and worse and worse.
I don't think there's any more of a headline grabber than cannibal. You know, it just puts you in a different category. And that became part of Jeffrey Dahmer's story. I think it made him immortally infamous.
Some people live good lives and become successful and raise families, and other people become Jeff Dahmer. and go down a road of no return.